I'm Corinne Schaefer, and welcome to Create Outside the Box. In this episode, I will be speaking with Emmy Award-winning wardrobe supervisor Melissa Stanton about her incredible career on Broadway, TV, and movies, how costumes can be transformative, and how constraints can lead to creativity. If you're interested in watching our conversation, please visit and subscribe to our Creative Operations YouTube channel under the playlist Create Outside the Box. Melissa Stanton grew up in Westfield, Massachusetts. After high school, she followed her older sister Nancy to New York, where she attended the Pratt Institute for Commercial Art and the Trapp Hagen School of Fashion for Illustration. After finding that neither career path was for her, her sister Nancy, who was then working as a costume designer for the Public Theater, offered her another, as wardrobe mistress on a production of The Seagull. The rest is history. Melissa worked at the Public and Shakespeare in the Park for 5 years, before working on Broadway in such productions as Sugar Babies, A Doll's Life, Alice in Wonderland, Pirates of Penzance, and the Radio City Music Hall, where she met and married the dance captain, Tom Stanton, who would later become my dance teacher and friend. Melissa left the Broadway production of My One and Only to work on her first movie, Francis Ford Coppola's The Cotton Club. What was supposed to be 3 weeks helping with fittings turned into 8 months, and by the end, Melissa was the costume supervisor for the second unit filming. Melissa's film work includes Desperately Seeking Susan, Working Girl, Regarding Henry, Scent of a Woman, It Could Happen to You, Mighty Aphrodite, 12 Monkeys, and Ocean's 11. She then segued into television with Law & Order, Oz, Boardwalk Empire, Orange is the New Black, and the first season of Russian Doll, for which she won an Emmy for Outstanding Contemporary Costumes. We had a few minor sound issues during our conversation, so to clarify, the second production Melissa did at the Public was Wally Shawn's Our Late Night. And later in our conversation, the Christopher that Melissa is speaking of is none other than the great Christopher Plummer. So I'm really excited to welcome Melissa Stanton on Create Outside the Box. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Of course. I always like talking to you.
I always like talking to you. Speaking of which, I was trying to think when we first met, it had to be at Club Benet.
I think you're probably right about that, although I think that I probably knew who you were beforehand because you were one of Tom's students, of course. And I would go to the recitals and see all of you people, and he would talk about his students, and you were one of the ones he talked about. So I suspect I knew who you were before I actually met you, but I do think Club Benet was the first thing, the place that we met going out dancing, because you guys amazingly had found it. Tom came home one night and he was like, the kids have found a place to swing dance. And I was like, really? And we went, and the rest is history.
Exactly. And we're talking, of course, about Tom Stanton, who is your late husband and was my dance teacher, in a lot of ways, also a mentor as well as a dear friend, and still influences my life to this day. And I'm curious what he said, because he was the first person to challenge my people pleasing, which I still have. I still have not beat, but boy, did he try to beat the apologizing out of me. So I'm wondering if I was presented as the I'm sorry girl, because he was going to kill me because I literally apologized after every time I made a mistake.
Very possible, because it does sound vaguely familiar to me. He could have said that about you easily. It makes sense why he would have been talking about you, because he would generally talk about people who were driving him crazy.
Yes. And I drove him crazy until I drove him so crazy that he ended up liking me.
Because he did. He liked you very, very much.
Yes. And we missed him, of course. And we had wonderful memories at Club Benet doing swing dancing and chatting and getting to know each other. But I realized like, I don't actually know the story of how you got into the entertainment industry and the costume and wardrobe industry.
Yeah, it's so convoluted. It was never my intent to do any of that. I had gone to college at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn for graphic design. I somehow thought I wanted to be in advertising. What a mistake. I did not want to be in advertising. I hated it. I hated every second that I was there. So then I transferred to the now defunct Tap Haven School of Fashion for fashion illustration.
Oh.
And I went there for a year. And unfortunately, because I'd already been at Pratt for 2 years, when I transferred, it was like regressing back to my first year at Pratt. And I wasn't learning anything new. It was all sort of a rehash of stuff that I'd already known and done before. So I wasn't really happy there either. Parents were highly distressed by all of this. In the meantime, my older sister, Nancy, she always had great direction in what she wanted to do. First she wanted to be a set designer. She knew this when she was a little kid. She was still in elementary school probably when she started doing this. And she initially went to NYU for set design and then transferred into costume design. She found she liked that better, graduated, and went to work at the New York Shakespeare Festival, the Public Theater, as one of Theone Aldridge's assistants. So she had, when I was like flailing about trying to figure out what I wanted to do, she called me. I was actually in Massachusetts, I believe, when she called me up at home at my parents' house. And she was like, she said she had just gotten a job at the Public doing 2 shows in rep. One was a production of The Seagull that Andre Gregory's Manhattan Project was doing. And it was running in rep with Wally Shawn's, I believe, his first play called Arlene that would run late at night afterwards and it had the same cast. They both had the same. So she called and she said, look, while you're trying to figure out what you want to do with your life, I need a wardrobe person. And these 2 shows are running for like 6 weeks. So that gives you 6 weeks. You'll have some income coming in. You want to do it. My response was, what's a wardrobe person? And she said, well, okay, so you have to be at the theater during a show. You iron everything, you clean it, you make sure everybody's dressed right, you mending, all of that kind of stuff. And I said, sure, why not? Fine. I never stopped after that. That was in like 1974, I believe. And I just stayed on pretty much. I went to work for Chelsea Theater Center for a short period of time and the Brooklyn Academy of Music. Doing the same thing. I worked in the shop. I did some stitching and stuff. I worked the shows, dressing. And yeah. And one thing sort of led to another, and I've done it ever since. And that was, like I said, 1974. Really a long time ago. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up.
Well, I think that's the key. You don't grow up and you keep that sense of wonder and that sense of magic. And if you're having fun as you go along, then I think you're the winner.
Yeah, it was great. It was something I had no intention of ever doing. And I really fell in love with it.
And I think that's great too, because everybody's different. Like you said, Nancy, your sister, she knew from a young age what direction she wanted to go in. And like it veered a little bit, but it still kind of stayed on target. And that was successful. And she also is an Emmy Award winner, but she won her Emmy for...
She won her Emmy for The Guiding Light soap opera, which she co-designed with David Dangle, who now heads up Joan Rivers Enterprises. And yeah, he just snowballed up in that direction. And yeah.
And then you, on the other hand, weren't sure of your direction and still ended up kind of stumbling into happiness, stumbling into a path that was very enriching and fun and has given you a lot of adventures. So I think that's inspiring because people might think, oh my gosh, there's only one path or only one way to come at life. And there actually isn't. And I think that that's, very inspiring for people to know that you can come at success in multiple ways. You started getting at it a little bit with what your sister was explaining, like, okay, what is a wardrobe supervisor? Like, what is the role that I'm doing? People will look at whether it's a Broadway show or TV or movies, and they'll look at these beautiful costumes, but I don't think people really understand that there's like a whole team behind the scenes that are creating and maintaining these costumes. How large is normally a costume or wardrobe team or department, and what are the main roles?
In terms of size, it depends on what the project is. In general, live theater or say Saturday Night Live, another live show, things like that have a fairly large costume department. There's the costume designer, her assistant. There's generally someone who's a shopper who runs around and goes to the stores, picks stuff up. It's a horrible job. In a taxi and on subways. There's, seamstresses and fitters and tailors and cutters and all of those people who actually have to make the things. And like I was saying, with live theater, you have a bigger crew because you have to, everything is much more immediate. So when you're watching a show and everybody runs off stage and there's a chorus of 20 and they all have to change their clothes at once, you need someone to help each one of those people. So you need a lot of people there. Whereas for most films, and I don't mean like the musical films and things like that, where you still end up with 8 million people. Most films have a much smaller crew. They have a core crew, which is generally your supervisor. There's usually 2, because there's generally a supervisor who deals with the principal wardrobe, and then one who deals with all the background actors, particularly if you're doing a period show where everybody needs to be dressed top to bottom.
Yeah.
And then each of those people have assistants. There's someone designated as the key costumer who is on set all the time, who has another bunch of dressers underneath them to help them maintain the look actually during the filming. They're out there right behind the camera, watching everything that's going on and making sure that everything is correct. And they have to the cameramen and the hair and makeup people and the script supervisor, so that continuity is correct. And there's a lot of little bits and pieces that they take care of, but they have help out there as well. A lot of that help comes in on a day-to-day basis as opposed to being hired for the production. It's like if you have, say, on Boardwalk Empire, where I was the supervisor, I was the background supervisor on that in their second season. And we would get there at the set location where my assistant and 1 or 2 other people had gone the night before generally to set up, to loading the costumes, racks and racks and racks of costumes, set it all up, spread out hats and accessories and stuff on tables. Everything had been pre-fitted. Everything was designated where it was going, but we still had about a rack or so of clothing just in case. And boxes of shoes and all sorts of stuff comes with you. And then we would get there around 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. It's glamour of theater. And literally start processing people and start dressing them and getting them ready so that when the rest of the crew arrived at 7 o'clock, by 7:30, we would have enough people ready to go on set that they could start filming their day. And we would stay there all day. And then at the end of the day, reverse the process, pack everything up. Usually if there were a lot of people, because there were some days we had 150, 200 extras.
Yeah.
There would be a crew who came the next day to wrap everything up and get back on a truck and bring it back to the stage where our offices were and do the laundry and sort it all out and start out mending and clean up the moldy shoes because they've gotten wet and disgusting. Everybody's least favorite job, moldy shoes. And I would generally leave the set after everybody was dressed in the morning and go back so that I could start getting everything ready for the next day.
Wow.
Get it on racks to go on trucks where I would have another crew who would load the truck and go out to wherever we were going the next day to set up that location. So that you'd have a lot of people. If you have a small movie where you only have a few people and it's modern, you don't need 8 million people. There were days when I literally was sitting on the phone calling everybody I knew in the costume union to try to get them to come to work. Because when we were doing Boardwalk, it was very busy that year.
Yeah.
There were lots and lots of shows going. They were all huge. They all needed people. And getting help was hard. You spend your time on the phone just calling people. And so then you turn to your assistant to call anyone you know. We just need bodies. If they have a half a brain, can sew a button and run a zipper up, then please hire them.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There's so much that you're maintaining as well. And were you dealing with, depending on what show you're dealing with, because you've had the opportunity to work on Broadway, in TV, and also in film. And the types of costumes used for like theater versus TV and film can be different. So what are the differences of the costumes for each medium?
Well, generally for film, your clothes, once again, as long as you aren't doing heavy duty period stuff, where you're using real pieces, which we did use sometimes on Boardwalk. We had clothes that were close to 100 years old.
Wow.
But generally those clothes, if they were in very good condition, they would go to the principal actors, needless to say, or they would get copied. Someone would go out and shop the fabrics and they would deconstruct the item and make a new pattern from it and use it as a pattern to make new clothes. But generally with modern stuff, you don't have to think about any of that kind of thing. It just happens. You go to the store, you buy stuff, you have it fitted, everything goes through fittings. People in modern movies who are in background bring their own clothes.
Really?
They bring a selection. They're asked to bring a selection, usually like 3 or 4 different options. And in the morning, I would go with the assistant costume designer over to the background section, and we would look at what everybody brought to make sure and pick out which pieces of theirs we would like them to wear to make sure that they weren't wearing the same color as, say, the leading lady. That their clothes were appropriate, that they weren't like wearing t-shirts in a fancy restaurant, all of that kind of thing. And we would also have clothes there if there was something, if they just didn't look right. I've had people show up for stuff for big fancy party scenes and the only shoes they brought are sneakers. And it's like, this is supposed to be the Met Gala. Why are you bringing me sneakers? Well, I don't own any high heels. Well, it's a career. Maybe you should go to Payless or wherever and buy a pair of inexpensive black high heels.
Yeah.
Because we're going to put some really nasty shoes on your feet right now. Many other people in the past. So there is that. The thing with theater costumes, because you're wearing the same thing over and over and over again 8 times a week, and you get that kind of wear and tear, and you also have to accommodate quick changes, they're generally clothes that if you saw up close, real people couldn't wear on the street because they've been rigged with snaps or Velcro or whatever to make them easy on, easy off. Their fabrics tend to be somewhat sturdier, although that's not often true. They're constructed like crazy. And it is so that they last and they can deal with the fact that they have to go through a lot during the week. And you can't wash them all the time because there's not enough time between shows to do that, as I'm sure you well know, that sometimes you spend time going, I'm so sorry, you have to wear your smelly costume again tomorrow. So there is a lot of that. The only thing that comes up in TV land and movie land is when you do need multiples, which is frequent for stunt scenes or for photo doubles, which happens quite a bit with big shows, because a lot of times, literally, you'll get something where you'll send out what is the second unit team, which is a smaller camera crew and a smaller group of people, to do shots of, say, the main character going in and out of an apartment building from a distance, except that the person who is actually playing that role, the lead actor, is on set doing an actual acting scene with dialogue and stuff. So they take someone who looks like them, dresses them up like them, and sends them out to literally go in and out of the building. So you need multiple clothes for that. You need multiple clothes for stunts. You need multiple clothes for if time is passing through the movie, because sometimes you need stuff that you have to age it more as it goes along, so it looks like it's been worn longer. And it starts out, at the beginning of the movie looking good, and they wear it through the whole movie so that by the end of the movie, it's a little dirty, it's a little raggy. That's a whole other industry, the people who do distressing and dying.
Oh my gosh.
We do it on set, but for big sequences and stuff, there are people, or for say, something like Pirates of the Caribbean, where everybody's supposed to be ratty and catty and all those clothes are made for them. Well, yeah, Johnny Depp's clothes looked brand new when they started, but someone had to actually sit there and make them look old and wonderful.
Wow.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of working with that woman whose name escapes me at the moment because I'm old. And she's incredibly talented, and it's amazing to watch her do what she does.
That sounds really challenging to make it look authentically old.
Yeah, it's amazing to watch these people do this. And because there are people who do it for scenery as well. So it's an amazing process, and it always looks absolutely real when they're done.
Wow. Just to go back, just so I'm clear, the photo double, is that the actor that then is for the long distance shot? Yes. Or for, if there's a car driving by that the lead character is supposed to be driving, but the lead character has gone home for the day or whatever because they've been on set somewhere else for hours on end. So the car driving by gets someone, or sometimes it's that person who's not necessarily the same gender. It's always fun when you get like the guy with the mustache and they tell you, this is the person who's going to be driving the car for Michelle Fun. Yeah, okay, guess the camera's not getting real close. So you just kind of put them in something vaguely the same color because the camera can't get too close. That's hysterical. So you'd have the principal actor, you'd have the photo double. Is the photo double sometimes the stand-in? Do they double that up?
Sometimes they are, because they do tend to hire stand-ins who, well, first of all, you need someone who's the same height, preferably more or less the same coloring. And depending on who your cinematographer is, sometimes you have to actually dress those people in clothes that are similar, because it's the way it affects the lighting. It makes perfect sense. A lot of times we just throw a piece of fabric or a sweater or something that's a similar color to whatever the actor's wearing, just so they have an idea out at the camera what is going to finally walk out on set.
Mm-hmm. You were getting into it a little bit with, especially if you're thinking of something like Pirates of the Caribbean, where you have these epic costumes that they've aged and they just bring you into a different world. It just reminds you how transformative costumes can be to the actors and also to the storytelling. I just wanted you to speak a little bit on how costumes are transformative.
Well, some people, oddly enough, don't care, but for the most part, I think the actors, when the costumes are happening, when you finally get the actor signed, sealed, delivered to you, our department would make an appointment to have them come in and measured and talk and discuss their characters, so that first and foremost, you have to make sure the actors are comfortable and that your vision of what the character is coincides with their vision, and also with the director's vision and the writer's vision and the producer's vision. There's a whole lot of people to make happy. But if the actor is not comfortable in their clothes, that's going to be detrimental to everything.
Yeah.
So having their input is very important. They have to feel at home in their clothes. And it does make a difference. And I have run into people who literally, once they put the clothes on, if you've done your job right and the designers have done their job right, they feel like whatever character they're creating, once they have those clothes on, they feel like they belong in those clothes. And that's really important, almost more than anything. If you're uncomfortable in your clothes, I mean, in day-to-day life, if you're uncomfortable in your clothes, you're going to be unhappy. And it's 10 times more important when you're making someone turn into something abstract, because these characters are not necessarily real people. And even if they're based on real people, you have to somehow help the actors get into that mindset. And that can be difficult sometimes for all around, because your vision of what any character is not necessarily what the actor has come up with. It's a real collaboration between the production staff and also the prop department, and the set designers are also and lighting is also involved in all of this, because it affects everybody. There's color palettes to be taken into consideration. And you have to make sure, especially in theater, that you have not dressed someone in the same color as the set, because then you won't see them.
Yeah.
That has unfortunately happened quite a bit in things that I've seen. And I'm like, oh, they kind of blend, don't they? But yeah, and a lot of times it's very collaborative with the prop department. A case in point is when we did 12 Monkeys, and Bruce Willis's character wears that strange plastic suit that he wears when he goes out collecting artifacts. And that we worked very, very closely with the prop department in making that, because it had all of this stuff that he had to have little grippers and stuff like that. So the costume designer, Julie Weiss, who is amazing in her own right, designed sort of the concept for the plastic piece, the plastic suit. And then we met with the property department, Doug, whatever his last name was. And he said, okay, we've met with Bruce, and Bruce wants to have like this thing here and this thing here. And Terry Gilliam had very distinct ideas of what this suit should be. And it was like heavy, made out of heavy plastic, just so that it didn't fall apart.
Yeah.
And he had to get in and out of it constantly. And, as I said, Bruce had very specific ideas about what he wanted to do in it. And he had to be able to move around as well. So he had to have a certain amount of practicality there without him dying of perspiration, and because we also were worried about it fogging up and all that, which finally we just kind of went with it. But that outfit was a very difficult thing to do, and to help solve a lot of those problems was working with the prop department to figure out how to make it a functional thing that looked like it could actually exist in the world. And Julie, as I said, God bless her, Julie Weiss is one of those people who literally will go out on the street and she will see some little coil of electrical wire on the ground that's multicolored, and she will pick it up and she will go, "It's a treasure. Let's put it on a costume." And I would go, "It's dirty, no." But I like it. And it would end up on a costume and it would look great. She truly is an amazing woman. So
that's, I love what you're saying in the sense that you've got all of these creative people, and even though there's the different departments and you think about, okay, you've got the actors, you've got the director, everybody has to collaborate on this because it's very important for the success of whatever story you're trying to tell, that everyone's telling the same story.
Yes. And that is frequently, it takes a few meetings to get to the same story. I've worked on shows where literally, I think some of the actors are in a different movie altogether. Their concept of what the project is and our concept of what the project is, and sometimes even other actors' concept of what the project is, are very different, and you end up with something really disjointed that does not work very well. I've done a couple of those. I'm not naming names.
Well, and I think that's why you need to be flexible, because I know that there have been a few instances where I got a role, I did all of the background work of reading any material that had to do with the show or the opera, my connections in my head where I could see the character, my research, and you have kind of this framework. But if you get to the initial meeting where they have the whole cast and you're talking to the director and you get a sense that the director has a different idea, or you get to the actual scenes and you look at the staging and blocking or choreography that you're doing, if you cling desperately to that old idea, it's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. So you as a performer then have to go, okay, maybe I can use this someplace else. Maybe this can layer into the performance somehow, but I have to be flexible now because I have to get on board.
Yeah, yes. Because otherwise you just end up with something that's a complete mess. And it's why communication in any production is so incredibly important. because while you're there as a creative person to put forward your own ideas, you have to make sure that those ideas mesh with everybody else's, because ultimately you're all working towards the final project. But if you're all coming at it with different ideas, there's never going to be a final project that makes any sense. So yeah, it is a real give and take, and it's a lot of talking and sometimes a lot of compromise.
Yeah. And compromise isn't the worst thing, because sometimes if you have a kernel of an idea and somebody else has a kernel of an idea, the compromise might be better than either of your ideas.
Exactly. And it frequently is. And I've worked with some people who are very like, you hired me to do this. This is what I do. This is what I'm going to do no matter what. And they sort of bulldoze their idea in. And I've ended up on set with some very uncomfortable actors going, I don't like this thing I'm wearing. I don't feel it's right for the character. And it's all because the person who was designing that outfit or styling that outfit was not listening to what the actors were saying about their character. And it made the actors have a harder time doing their job, because they were trying to get beyond what they were wearing. And I would frequently get stuck in the middle because I was not the person who picked the clothes. The costume designer would be. But if you get someone who's a very inflexible person as your costume designer who won't listen to you or won't listen to the actors, then it's not a happy situation.
No, because as you were saying earlier, the thing about costumes is, like, yes, you do all of the work ahead of time, or you'll have rehearsals where you're working and you're out of costume. But when a costume is successful, it's when you put it on, you embody the character, and it also serves as a separation between you, the person, and the character, because all of a sudden you look different. So you can kind of separate from yourself. When you see yourself in a wig or you see yourself with different makeup, you don't look like yourself. And so it's easier for you to then fully embody somebody. And when it works, like you were saying, it's seamless and you just start moving differently. Like if you're wearing, just talking about shoes and not moldy shoes, but if you're wearing, high heels, you carry yourself and walk differently than you're wearing sneakers. So it's the same thing with costumes. If you're wearing something period, or you're maybe wearing something skimpy, you are going to move and interact differently. So it's a huge aid. And to what you were saying is, when things are not cohesive and there's these different ideas, there's a block because you're not feeling comfortable. And so you have to get through that block of feeling uncomfortable in anything that you're wearing to move forward. And that is not a stumbling block you want to give to actors, because they're focusing on the wrong thing.
It's not. And I mean, now sometimes they're uncomfortable for other reasons because the clothes themselves are uncomfortable. And this goes towards doing something that takes place, say, in the 50s or 60s. We generally will do people undergarments all the way, because here comes the pile of extras, we hand them the girdles, and they're all like, no one will ever see it. And it's like, well, the thing is that, first of all, it will make your clothes hang differently.
Yeah.
And it's a part of the mindset. It's part of your clothes. It's part of the way women dressed at that point. And theoretically, this will help you. So, and it does make the clothes hang differently. And a lot of people don't even realize that. It's like, here at 60s, it's a 60s dress. No one will ever see what's underneath it. What difference does it make? But once you have the proper undergarments underneath it, you just carry yourself differently. And it's the way people carried themselves in that time frame, partly because that was just how you dressed. It's a weird thing to think about, that what you've got on underneath your clothes makes that much difference, but it actually does.
And to say, like, from my experience, sometimes you need that structure in order to be comfortable. Because if you're wearing something, period, those clothes were built to go over those things. So even though you feel like, oh my gosh, I've got all these other pieces, trust me, sometimes you need the support system because you're going to be more uncomfortable after. At least that's my experience doing, especially with heavy costumes.
Right. And I'm sure that you've had your fair share of things with corsets and stuff like that is uncomfortable to wear, but it does all help with creating that character that you're trying to get to. Because it just makes you carry everything differently. It does put you in a totally different place. So
we've brought up, the 1950s and 60s, Boardwalk Empire, 12 Monkeys, corsets, and of course you worked on the 80s. Everyone thinks of 80s fashion when they think of this iconic movie, Working Girl, which you also worked on. What is your favorite time period to dress for?
That's so difficult because everything has its own wonderful moments. I think probably 20s and 30s, because I just love those clothes. They're so beautiful, and they just have such a great shape and structure and fabric and everything. The men's clothes were beautiful. The women's clothes were beautiful. But yeah, it's really hard to pick a time period because everything has its own wonderful moments. I mean, if you go into the 60s, you've got all that stuff that's a carryover from the 50s at the beginning. And then it goes towards all that mod sort of mini skirts and that segues into hippie land, which is completely different. And then you get into Working Girl, the quintessential 80s. Big hair, big shoulders, sneakers.
Now, oftentimes when you're making movies, and there's not to say that they were trying to do a parody, but normally if you're kind of doing a wink at the fashion trends, normally it's a look back. But Working Girl was actually made during that time and was kind of winking at what was going on. That was different.
Was because yes, it was totally contemporary, and her look, Melanie's look at the beginning of that movie, hers and Joan Cusack's, where they were the secretaries who would take the ferry from Staten Island over to work in the city, and they would have to walk a lot. So they carried their high heels in their handbags and wore clunky sneakers because they were like traipsing back and forth. But while they were in the office, they had to have dressy shoes on. They couldn't wear their sneakers during the day. And they had suits with big shoulders and lots of hair. And yeah, and then she sort of transforms into something that's more upper class, shall we say, where we stopped shopping at places like mall stores, and it wasn't Forever 21 because that didn't exist then, but those kinds of, more moderately priced stores, that we went to places that these girls actually would have shopped in, Century 21 and discount designer like Marshalls and TJ Maxx and those kind of stores. And then once she transforms, we started shopping at Bloomingdale's and Saks and had much fancier, nicer stuff for her character and for Sigourney Weaver's character. So it was interesting to do that transformation through that. but everything was based on what people really were and what those women who did used to commute back and forth from Staten Island or from New Jersey, who were the hundreds of working girls who worked in the offices as the support systems, would wear with what they could afford, with what they saw in fashion magazines that they couldn't afford. So they went and bought sort of the cheaper version of it, which pretty generally always looked like the cheaper version of it. But, I had done it myself in the 70s when I was in my early 20s and had to buy stuff. I would shop at lesser places looking for things that kind of looked like what was in the magazines or what was trendy at the moment. So I can sympathize with what they wore. It was not a good look. The 80s in general was not a good look, even the good stuff. But that's just me. Some people really love it. What can I say? I'm really glad that hair has fixed itself.
Me too. A lot of times when people are thinking about, especially with movies, they, or anything that's on TV or Netflix, they think, oh, they must have these enormous budgets and they can just do whatever they want. But actually, there's often a lot of constraints that you have to work under. And those constraints a lot of times lead to creativity because you have to work around it. So what was the biggest creative solution to a constraint that you had to deal with?
Generally, in my experience, the budget constraints have just run up against not having enough multiples for the stunt sequence. Which is a total nightmare because they ask you this before they figured out what the stunt is at the beginning of the show or the episode, what your budget's going to be, and the costume designer and the assistant costume designer will sit down and figure out what it is. And then they're like, oh, we're throwing in this big stunt. And oh, by the way, we've added all these people to it. And it's like, what are we going to do? I have had stuff where I've had to make duplicate costumes on the quickie. There was a show I did that did not ever actually air. We filmed a number of episodes of it, and then it just went away, mercifully. But it was a law drama. And one day we went to work, and 3 people who had been playing jurors weren't there. They had worn their own clothes. We were matching into the same day. We were doing a reshoot on something, and those people weren't there. So, of course, their clothes weren't there with them. We were in Yonkers. Thank God there's some lovely thrift shops there. And because we take pictures of everything on set all the time, so we know what everybody's wearing and what it looks like. I went armed with a bunch of pictures over to the thrift shop and did a really fast binge shop, hoping I could find something that kind of matched what these people were wearing.
Oh my gosh.
And, we did it. It worked. No one ever really noticed. I've done that on a few things because that is something that comes up quite a bit with people wearing their clothes.
I didn't realize that people brought their own clothes. I mean, it makes sense from a budget and ease standpoint. I totally get it. It's like, oh, great. You don't have to costume all of the extras. Great. But what you're saying is God forbid you don't have somebody and they're an extra front of scene, like a juror or something. You are up a creek.
You are. Yes, you are. It's that's the kind of stressing thing. And I've had it happen on numerous occasions, that kind of thing. Or, somebody, if you're doing an episodic television show and you've done stuff and that's the prior episode, say, is finished, you've moved on from episode 6 to episode 7 or whatever, and they're off in the editing room with episode 6, and they're like, oh, we need another shot of such and such. So we're going to schedule this in the middle of episode 7 to do a reshoot on that. And we can't get those same people back, but they need to match. There's a lot of that kind of stuff that does happen. It mercifully doesn't happen often, but it does happen where you're literally trying to make some extra look like some other extra. It's kind of sad.
Oh my gosh. Well, going from like sad and stressful to like happy and exciting, in 2019, you and your team won the 2019 Emmy for outstanding modern costume design, correct? For Russian Doll.
For the first season with our fabulous designer, Jen Rogan, who is a genius. She's just wonderful and amazing to work with in every way. We were a well-oiled team too, because we were basically the same team who had been together on Orange is the New Black for a while. So we worked really well together, and a number of cast members, in fact, transferred over, including, most importantly, Natasha Lyonne, whose creation this all was. And that experience with the Emmys, that was, first of all, getting nominated was unexpected, to say the least, because it is a contemporary show that doesn't have a lot of costumes. It was severely tied by budget constraints. There was not a lot of money on that job. Most of the clothes were shopped at H&M, Forever 21. We had a few more expensive pieces. This goes back to what you were saying in the budget constraint thing, kind of. Her coat that she wears, which was, I believe it was a Ralph Lauren coat. It's like a big, heavy navy blue, midnight blue overcoat. When the coat went from being a coat she wore once or twice during the movie to a coat that she dies in numerous times in various ways, we suddenly realized we needed a whole mess of these coats.
Yeah.
It was after the season for coats, for starter. So we managed to find one more coat in the stores. One of Jen's assistants spent a lot of time calling the manufacturers and the designers out there, I believe, as I said, Ralph Lauren, I think, their offices to try to track these coats down. We had coats being shipped in from any Lord & Taylor's or Macy's or wherever that had them, which wasn't enough. And then, God bless our fabulous seamstress, Raven, who ended up making 3 of these coats. Because we needed coats for, not only for Natasha, we needed coats for her stunt double. We needed coats for her photo double because we used her photo double a lot. Okay. And because we needed them for the stunt double, we needed ones we could destroy because she's going to pick that car, fall downstairs, do all sorts of things in this coat. So that was a fun and horrifying moment in our lives, making these coats. More horrifying for Ravens, who I kept calling going, I need another coat. And she's like, when? I'm like, this afternoon. And she's like, I can't do that. And somehow she would manage to do that, where she's literally making them from scratch.
And again, all because the actor's like, you know what? I kind of like this coat better. I'm going to stick with this one. And you're like, great. I don't have, 20, 30 of these.
Somehow you make it happen.
Yeah.
I mean, it just gets done. Sometimes it's a little stress-making and a little frightening where you're sitting there going, well, I don't have enough coats on set to actually film the scene that we're going to film. So you figure out a way to make it work.
Yeah.
Because the worst thing you want to do is hold up camera. Because that costs a lot of money for everybody.
A lot more than the coats.
People standing around waiting for you to get a coat.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. And I also thought it was cool, like you were saying, a lot of the pieces from that were H&M or were Forever 21. They weren't super expensive. And you just tailored them. That's what makes the difference, is when it fits.
Yeah. Everything was tailored. Some of it we needed to do tricks with. If you watch the show very carefully when it first starts, and she has that lovely red blouse on that has big ruffles down the front, and the ruffles would do horrible things when she was actually moving. They would just droop and look awful and dumpy. And every time I watch the show, I'm like, that was before we fixed that, where literally I had to sew all the ruffles into place so they did not move. And I spent a lot of time doing that because I think we had about a dozen of those blouses. This is the problem with shows that don't have a lot of clothes, is that if they wear them all the time, you need lots of them.
Yeah. And the whole premise of Russian Doll is kind of this, for those who haven't seen it, it's kind of this Groundhog Day thing where there's a lot of repetition, which is why there's not a huge range of variety with the costumes.
But as I said, when we were nominated for it, we were all very surprised, for starters. I mean, I'm glad that someone out there actually appreciated our work. Jen had called me on the phone that afternoon, and she was like, Russian Doll was just nominated for costumes. And I was like, oh, congratulations. She's like, no, you too. And I was like, oh, okay. So then I got to go to LA. We were all, it was me, her assistant, Charlotte. The three of us went, and we sat there through the awards show, which was the night before the actor awards, because there's so many awards now at the Emmys. We were there, and we were like, we're not going to, there's no way. There's absolutely no way we're going to win. We were up against Schitt's Creek. They're going to win. We're not going to win. And when they said that we had won, Charlotte and I turned to each other. We stared at each other for a while. And Jen's husband was sitting on the other side of her going, it's you guys. You can go up.
So you're all frozen.
Yeah, we couldn't believe it. And so we went up, and the whole experience was so incredibly surreal to me that we got up there and Jen made her little speech, and I have no idea what she said. And then they sort of swooped us off backstage to get up, take pictures and do interviews. And this is so weird to me. And then this big gold statue that you're going to have to get home on a plane. And it comes in a big box.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, this big box is not going on the plane. So the day that it came, the following day when I was leaving, I wrapped it all up in my clothes and stuck it in my bag. Of course, I'm going through the checkpoint, TSA stopped me because, of course, there's a big metal object in my carry-on. And they're like, we're sorry, we need to look and see what this is. And so I'm like, it's fine. I knew this was going to happen. And they look, and they're like, and finally the TSA lady, God bless her, she was so sweet. She said, I have to ask, what is this? I've seen 20 of these this morning. And I was like, oh, it's an Emmy Award, and you're going to see a whole lot more of them before your day is done.
I think that's amazing. It's like all these people, and they're like, wow, keep setting off the alarm. Like, what's going on? Is there a major threat? No, it's the entertainment industry.
There's 3 days of awards. There's going to be a lot of people coming through LAX with these things. So,
and they're heavy, right? They're super heavy.
They are heavy. They're very heavy, and they're much heavier than you think they're going to be. And they're big. One of the things they do when they swoop you off, because of course nothing has names or anything on it, because they don't know who the winners are going to be, So you have to go through this whole thing where you fill out your name and your address and what you were nominated for and make sure everything's right. And they're like, we'll send you the little plaque when it's ready. Months and months and months pass without the little plaque. We're all calling each other going, "Got your name right yet?" And then it comes, and I have to give them credit. They send a little screwdriver with the little screws to put it on.
Oh, nice.
Because I'm like, well, when it comes, how do you get it on there? And because mine attached completely differently than how my sister's did, because hers was much older. Mine was also much shinier. But yeah, it was a great surreal thing. And then after the ceremony, we went to, they have a big party that had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. I saw like two people that I knew. It was also very loud. They had weird performer, dancer, gymnast, something's going on some stage in the middle of this gigantic room. All we could think about was that our feet hurt. Like, oh, please let me get my high heels off. My feet hurt. Because then we were going to another party that was held by Netflix for us. And that mercifully I had a pair of flats to change into. And yeah, there were lots of women in evening gowns and slippers at that party. But it was great. It was a wonderful experience, and I'm really glad that I got to do it. It was something I never, ever expected in my life to ever get to do that. And yeah.
So deserved, though. Like, I think the timing of everything, I think it's also just, and it's honoring your career, your whole body of work. And you do deserve it so much. And what was funny was when I finally saw it in person, I didn't know that your sister had also won an Emmy. So I saw these two Emmys next to each other. Like, how surreal is it also? Like, I mean, Nancy's your only sister, and somehow both of you won Emmys. And
it's amazing. And it's like, I think about, I kind of wish that my mother, who was kind of both of our guiding light into this career, she was always very encouraging of our creativity. And she would bring us to the theater and bring us to the movies. And she loved the entertainment business, even though she had absolutely nothing to do with it ever. I think that she would be very proud about what both of us accomplished in jobs that, quite frankly, when we were growing up in Western Massachusetts, weren't even really jobs we knew existed as real jobs. People didn't do that where I came from.
Yeah.
And I think this is true of almost everywhere, is that people don't see the creative arts as a real career path. It's kind of a fantasy world thing that and it is because what most people see, as you were saying before, it's what's actually out there in front of you. It's the actors. They don't think about everybody behind the scenes in all departments whose collaborative efforts have made what you're seeing as a final product a reality.
Yeah.
No one thinks about the set designers and the costume designers and the lighting designers and the sound technicians and, the people who just have to slog stuff around and the guys with the hammers who are building stuff and the people with the paintbrushes who are making the clothes look old and all of that kind of stuff. None of that enters into it. It's like they will kind of sometimes think about the hair and makeup people only because you see people's faces in front of you when you're watching a movie and you know someone had done their hair and fixed their makeup. But that's a tough job that I wouldn't want. I don't envy either of those departments. it's a hard thing, and people don't realize how hard it is. They think that everything about films and theater and movie making and even TV commercials, print work, all of that stuff. There's an army of us who work on all of those things, and none of us are very rarely recognized, which is how it should be. If you're noticing what we've done it wrong.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the reason why people don't think about the army of people behind the scenes is because you've done your job and you've transfixed and transformed everybody into this different world. But there is a lack of, because it's so seamless, it ends up being kind of a lack of appreciation and understanding. I also feel that there's also a lack of appreciation and understanding of that there's actually work involved. Like, people don't wake up twirling and spinning and doing everything perfectly. And like, you're the fairy godmother and you're just like whipping up creations. And it's so fun that there's, long hours, a lot of sacrifice of a normal life and friendships and relationships, a lot of discipline and training and tedious things to get to, if you're lucky, 2 hours of fun,
Oh, I know. And there's a lot of people who will say, well, but why does it take so long to make a movie? Because it is months and months and months and months and months to turn out your 2-hour project. And you'll sit there and go, well, because we film maybe on a good day, 5 minutes worth of what you're seeing, because everything takes so long to set up, because it is so meticulous and it is to make a seamless product at the end. It's not an easy job. Costumes, even within the industry, for the longest time, it's gotten much better, but for the longest time was kind of looked on as the job that, it's like the carpenter's wife is a wardrobe person, or the prop person's wife is which it's not. And they're like, oh, you're just doing costumes. That's so easy. No, I haul around hundreds of pounds of clothes every day.
Yeah.
And they don't realize how heavy this stuff is, and that it really is physical labor involved, even though it is, quote unquote, just clothes, which is a term I've heard more often.
Because people don't think. I mean, I knew when I did Phantom of the Opera, that was the show that I did that had the most constructed and heaviest costumes.
Sure.
And the wonderful dressers that we had, and they would rotate. So a lot of times they weren't always doing the same thing, which I think is also good because it gives them, like, if you're always dealing with the women's costumes that are super heavy, like, you just need a break. But they would get injuries. Like, these were young people that were having problems with their hands and wrists, because in theater, you can speak to this. You brought it up a little bit before. We don't have zippers. You want to know why? Because zippers break easily. So they're doing all of this, like, hook and eye and snaps, all of this like little work repetitively. And it really, between that and the weight, it just takes a beating on your body.
It does. And we used to actually call that wardrobe wrist, because it's from carrying clothes, hanging on hangers, like that.
Yeah.
Pulling all the time. And you carry, 4 or 5 costumes like that on wire hangers, and everything's got more than one piece. Everything's in a garment bag. There's shoes in the bottom of those bags, weighing even more. And you haul it back and forth all the time. And people don't realize that there is a physical toll to that, to doing costumes. You're also up and down. When you're doing quick changes in theater, fastening people's shoes, you're on your knees a lot. You have to get up fast. You have to move around. Then you're picking stuff up and setting stuff down, and they don't realize how physical it all is. They see pretty close as the end product, and that's where the thought process ends, which, yeah, why not? It should.
It should, as long as there's, appreciation of why things cost sometimes what they do and why people should be getting the salary rates, because you're seeing the duck gliding on the lake and that's beautiful, but you don't see the little feet underneath that are and that's everybody behind the scenes, you don't see that.
I'm going to envision myself as duck feet for the rest of my life now, Corinne. The thing is, people don't really know what goes on behind the scenes. A lot goes on behind the scenes. And, I feel very honored to be part of what goes on behind the scenes. I have to say that every time I go to the theater, I wish I were behind the scenes instead of sitting in the audience. Frequently when I go to the movies, especially if it's a big musical, it's like when I saw Rocket Man and I left there going, oh God, I wish I'd done that. And then I would think about it and go, that was really hard, that movie. I'm really glad I didn't work on that. Because it's so massive. And I'm sure a lot of people just went, pretty costume.
What for you have been some of the greatest artistic experiences that you've had? Projects that you really felt fulfilled after doing?
Oddly, 12 Monkeys was one, because it's just so different from everything else. And it's good. I would say, sadly, that most of the stuff that I've done that I felt most fulfilled by was theater, for starters. I mean, my heart has always been in theater, even though I haven't done it for years and moved on to film and television. There's something about live theater and live performances that you just cannot compete with. It's an energy that you get back from the audience. Even if you're not the performer, that energy translates to every single person backstage. And that, there's nothing like that, as far as I'm concerned. And I would also say that probably, this sounds so sad, that toward the beginning of my career, nothing has compared with the 5 years I spent at the Public Theater in the 70s. When I was first starting out, I learned so much. It was the best schooling I ever could have had, and it was all just hands-on. We were a big family there. We did a lot of different shows because everything is for a limited amount of time there, generally for like a 6-week span. You go through a whole lot of shows while you're there. You get to also see, because there's more than one theater in there, you get to see a lot of shows too. I remember when I was doing Seagull, that first show I did there, that in the theater across the way that we shared a mystery door with, there was a door that led into somewhere up by their lighting booth on the next theater, was a show called Kid Champion that Chris Walken was starring in. And when I had really nothing to do, Chris Walken was not like that well known at that point. He was a theater actor. And I have no idea what that show was about. I think he was a rock star, but I'm not positive because I only saw it in bits and pieces when I had a chance to like go through that door and watch for a few minutes. I remember going downstairs at one point into the Newman Theater, which was the main stage there, and watching rehearsals for Chorus Line that was getting ready to move to Broadway. It was being exposed to so many different people and so many different ideas. I've never experienced anything like working in that situation for those 5 years. It was an unbelievable, exciting interesting thing to have happen. I met a lot of great people. And like I said, I learned so much from being there, from so many people in all across the board.
You started talking about how a lot of these creative people, like whether they were actors or directors at the public, were very inspirational to you. Who have been, outside of the public, some of your favorite creative people to work with, whether it's a costume designer or a director or an actor?
Well, Julie Weiss, who I mentioned before, who is just incredibly amazing. I'm trying to think like who. There's just so many. Everybody, except for the really evil ones, who shall go unnamed. Everybody just lends so much that's different. Everybody's viewpoint is different. Everybody's talent is different. And all of that is inspirational in its own way. I've always fed off of not just the costume designers, but sometimes the actors. Sometimes it's like my coworkers. So that's like, it's just such a hard question to answer. There's just too many people that.
Was there someone especially iconic to you that you're glad you got the opportunity to work with?
There's a lot of them. Madeline Kahn.
Yeah.
Madeline Kahn, right off the bat, I would say Madeline Kahn. I adored her. She was wonderful. I was fortunate enough to work with her at the public, and then I also got to do a film with her, which was really nice. Oh, golly.
Directors? Christopher, yeah, you've got him behind you at the public.
Who actually came, we got off to a really bumpy start, me and Christopher. He's tough. There's a lot of people like that, though, that I kept hearing like, oh my God, they're so horrible. They're so hard to work with. And then you get there and it's like, no, they just want you to be professional. Do your job and you'll be fine with them. Directors. I'm like, Mike Nichols.
Mm-hmm.
Without a doubt, I've done a number of things with him once again, worked at public with him, and then got to do a couple movies with him. That was really nice. He was great. Terry Gilliam, just because there's just no one who to watch that mind working the way it worked, which was not always easy. Because, as I said, he's very visual and very creative. And sometimes what he sees in his head has trouble coming out of his mouth to relay to you how to fulfill his vision.
Yeah. But
his vision is awesome.
I mean, because you have big ones. You have Francis Ford Coppola in there with the Cotton Club.
I did. Francis was fun to work with. He was very welcoming to the crew and kind of in the trenches with us, which was nice. And that was the first movie that I worked on. I had no idea what to expect or even what I was supposed to do or where I was supposed to stand and how to not be in the wrong place at the wrong time, which was my greatest fear through much of that movie. But yeah, he was wonderful to watch do his thing. It's a lot of times you don't even notice how much is going on around you because you're so focused on what you're doing. You just know if people are nice to you or not.
Yeah.
It's the ones that you just sit there and go, oh my God, please be away from them.
Well, what I think is also so unique about your career is when you were coming in, and you were doing a lot of these events on Broadway, you were interacting with like old classic Hollywood at the beginning of your career. And then as you've moved forward, you've spanned multiple generations of genius. There's very few people that can connect back to a Jimmy Stewart or a Ginger Rogers, but then also have worked with George Clooney and the latest Netflix show. I mean, that is very unique. And just all the different styles going from somebody like Francis Ford Coppola and then doing, working on which one you were on Ocean's 11, right? With that Soderbergh.
Yes.
So again, these just very different styles, very different generations.
It's an odd thing because I really enjoy working on, and oddly enough, neither of those particularly small movies, but they both Francis and Soderbergh, both are more in the independent filmmaker world. As is, say, Woody Allen, who I've worked with numerous times, and even Mike Nichols to some degree, because he is sort of I don't want to say that he's really theatrical based, but there's something about him that it's more that sort of auteur kind of thing where you're really making their vision as opposed to, say, Sony's vision or Paramount's vision or HBO's vision or Netflix's vision. It belongs more to that one creative person.
Because that's been a big shift. It used to be, you had your Alfred Hitchcocks, you had your Francis Ford Coppola, you even had, your Woody Allens, but now everything is, as you said, it's a studio and it's all studio driven.
That I feel has been not necessarily detrimental, but it creates a different situation. It's a more corporate feeling on a lot of film sets that you aren't working so much for the project as you're working for the producer, or for the studio, because they really just want something to come out that's going to make money, which makes sense. But the art of what you're making becomes something non-existent. It doesn't matter if the product's good or not, as long as it makes money. I'm more interested and always have been in making something smaller, slightly odder. I don't care if it makes money in the long run, as long as I feel like it's something interesting and good.
And you're contributing something.
And it's about making art.
Yeah, and it's hard because you need to make art. For art to be sustainable, you can't ignore business, but it's when things get out of balance. And you can have things that start out as art and become a business, like, for example, any musical theater franchise, whether it's Les Mis or Phantom of the Opera or Miss Saigon or Beauty and the Beast. Cats. Your favorite cats. That probably started out as very unique artistic ventures, but now are a brand.
Yes, they are. They are. And in films, it's, the whole Marvel universe and all of that, where it's this big industrial machine almost. Which is not to say that these projects aren't good, because for the most part they are. But it's a different feeling if you're working on them, because you feel like your creativity is more constrained.
Because you feel more like a cog in a machine than someone creating something.
Yeah, exactly. And there's less of a we're all in this together kind of feeling that, I used to really like about doing films and doing smaller films and doing off-Broadway theater and, even doing Broadway theater is I just feel that by the nature of live theater, there's a more of a creativity allowance there than there is in film, because I don't think for the most part that anybody really goes into doing live theater for anything other than art. You don't go into live theater to make money. I mean, clearly some people do, because there's some of it out there that is obviously just a money-making machine. But for most original works of theater, be it a musical or a drama or a comedy or whatever, it's not about making money. It's about saying something.
Exactly. It's a calling. And you're right, because if everyone who got into theater, ballet, opera, any of these live performance art forms, we are not doing it for the money. If you stacked up what people have invested versus what they make, you are at a deficit.
Oh yeah. You cannot go into this business, into any of the arts to make money.
No, but there's something in you that, again, it's a calling. Like, you have to create, you have to storytell, you have to share. Like you were saying, the difference that you miss when you're in film and TV is that connection with the audience. You can't buy that.
Oh, it's true. I mean, creating art is its own currency. I mean, it's something that you do kind of because you need to do it.
Well, obviously, because you wouldn't have, there's the term struggling or starving artist, right? Why would you starve yourself for no reason? You're starving yourself, or you're putting yourself into these difficult situations so that when, the clouds part, and everything, the stars align, that you have a chance to have this magical connection and this magical thing, and you're willing to sacrifice for it.
Right. Yeah, you have to be, whether you're in the performing arts or if you are a painter or a photographer or a writer. You can't go into any of those to get rich.
No.
You might get rich, you might get lucky and get rich, but you probably aren't going to, which is why I think universally that any of us who have chosen to follow that kind of creative dream was always told when we were first starting out to go do it by somebody's mother, make sure you have a backup plan. I can't tell you how many people told me that maybe I should get my teaching degree just in case. And it's like, no, I don't want to teach. I don't want to be a teacher. At that point, I wanted to do art. Yeah. So, but people are always like, oh no, you're never going to get anywhere going to do that, because a lot of people, as I said before, don't look at it as a real job. Not a real job. I've had a lot of people tell me it's not a real job.
Yeah, or that those skills, I feel, and it's strange because I did listen to a conversation where this was specifically with women in, science and math, that, that they're not being encouraged or supported early on in school, and that women need to be supported to go into these industries. But you do kind of feel as an artist that society at large, and again, I'm generalizing, but that society at large would appreciate it so much better if you did math or worked on a computer, then you have value,
Yes. Whereas we do something fluffy.
Yeah, and that there's not substance to it, or they can't really understand the skills behind it. Whereas I think creativity is a worthwhile skill just because we're great at problem solving. Like we said in our discussion, like you have to be able to think outside of the box, or that people don't understand. It's like, well, what do you do when you get home? Do you turn on the TV? What do you do when you get in the car? Do you turn on the radio? Do you look at books? Do you look at magazines? Do you look at ads? Those are all creative people.
Yes.
And maybe if we didn't do our job so well, people would appreciate us more.
Well, that's entirely possible. I mean, I think that when people learn what we actually do, and when I talk to people when they ask about it, it's always very hard to explain what it is that we do. Because I think you either have that mindset or you don't.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of things like physicists, brain surgeons. I don't understand that either. So I'm sure that there are a lot of people who look at me and they go, well, what do you do? And I'm like, well, I do costumes for theater and films. And they look at me with like 7 heads because there's no way they can relate to that. And, I'll ask them what they do and they go, oh, I'm developing something or other. And I will stare at them just as blankly as they just stared at me. It's hard to explain to people who don't understand it. It does help them understand it somewhat. But yeah, a lot of people, because it's not in their realm of experience or the way they think, don't think of it as something real because, as you said before, it's not a tangible thing. Whereas, people who are doing math or people who are physicists or whatever, that they can see how that is useful.
There's no formula for creativity. There's no formula for talent.
No.
It's all subjective, which is why, within reason, but it is subjective, and it's hard to qualify and quantify sometimes. And so therefore, because it's hard to put in a box, people don't know what to do with it.
Well, because I also think that, people are like, oh, yeah, well, I go to movies. I like movies. But, if movies didn't exist, if TV didn't exist, I suppose I could get along. Whereas if the brain surgeon didn't exist, even though I don't really know what they do either, they do surgery on my brain, and that's kind of where it ends. That is something that I may or may not have to experience at some point in my life. So I understand that. Whereas, well, if the movies just went away, it wouldn't be fun, but okay. Because they aren't really having a severe impact on my life by their existence. And I think that is why people don't think of it as a serious thing, working in a creative aspect. If all art went away, if all paintings went away, nobody ever made them anymore, or books or whatever, I think that people in general would miss them, but it wouldn't have the impact on your life if, say, all the teachers disappeared, or all the doctors disappeared, or all the car makers disappeared, because all of those things are tangible and they can relate to them, whereas movies are kind of ephemeral.
Yeah. And I would argue, I think you're absolutely right. But I think that because it's not definable, we're not fully aware of the impact art has on our lives. It's something worth living for. Yes, you have the car, you have the job, you need to have your health, but what do you have them for other than to be inspired?
Right. No, and I agree with that. I agree with what you're saying that, and it's like if all of the actual art, if all paintings disappeared, I would listen. I know that. But, and I think that most people would, because I think that they don't realize how much of an impact the creative world has upon our day-to-day lives, because we don't directly necessarily interact with it, but we see it constantly. It's always there, even if it's literally just, what color you painted your walls. That's part of the creative process but people go, but it's just paint. And it's like, yeah, but you picked out a color to set a mood, to set a feeling, and that is what the creative process is all about. That's what we do is all about, is to change the way you feel somehow. It's to touch your emotions. It's not tangible. It's beyond that.
Exactly. And there's that wonderful scene in The Devil Wears Prada where Meryl Streep is explaining to Anne Hathaway's character that she didn't just pick up that blue sweater at TJ Maxx. And he just goes through the whole chain of thought of how she got that sweater in her hand. And that's what art is. You think you just picked up a table at IKEA.
Yeah, but there's so much more to it that you don't even, it's not conscious. That's why you aren't doing it consciously. It's like when you're in TJ Maxx and you're going down that rack of clothes and rejecting stuff. And then there's the blue sweater that you love. That's all. It's because that you like that blue sweater because it touches something inside of you. You've made somehow a connection there that you're probably not even aware of.
Exactly.
But that's why you chose that blue sweater over that pink one over there. Because the pink one didn't touch you the same way.
Yeah.
Everything around us affects us like that, but it's something you don't think about. Whereas people in the creative arts have to think about that because we are in the business of making that emotional connection. Like I said, it's like lighting that little spark that goes, oh, yeah, that one.
Yeah. We are the keepers of the stories. We are the storytellers. And it is our mission, whether it's through a piece of scenery or the way you transport people with a lighting design or an actual performance, we are contributing to telling these stories. And it contributes to our society, our culture, and also our history. So I think, we're in the same boat.
It's what you're saying, and I agree with you completely, is that all of that is done to make us think about something, to make us feel something, to make us reflect on ourselves and the world around us. And because that's not a tangible thing, people don't think about it that way necessarily. And that it kind of makes me sad because there's a lot of people who don't read books and don't watch movies and don't go to the theater. And I just feel like they're missing out on this whole aspect. We're making a product for your emotional health. Let's put it that way, as opposed to something for your physical self.
That's an excellent point. What we are doing is to feed people's souls. It is for, like you said, people's emotional health. And I think especially given the times that we're living with, we realize how much our emotional health impacts our physical health. And there's a reason why you have to take care of it and that you have to feed it. And whether that's through learning or being exposed to new things or having introspection, again, art, when you watch something, you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And so it makes you question what's your role in life, or it helps you think about another person. It builds empathy. These are all very valuable things for our society.
Yeah, or it can take you out of yourself, which is also a good thing, and leans towards, as you said, building empathy. But if you're like, it's why you go watch a feel good movie if you're feeling depressed.
It's healing.
It's you out of yourself, and it's a healing thing, and it's an emotional thing, and it's not a tangible thing, and therefore, sadly, a lot of people don't see the value in it because it's not, even though they experience it on a day-to-day basis, they aren't even aware that it's happening. And that's why they do that. And that's why Hallmark Christmas movies are a big thing.
Exactly. Thank you so, so much. And I really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Create Outside the Box. Please follow us, like, and subscribe on Spotify, Buzzsprout, and now Apple Podcasts. And check us out on our Creative Operations YouTube channel, where you can subscribe to watch our interviews. For more information about Creative Operations, please visit www.creative-operations.org.